Trump's 100% tariffs are counting down to launch. Beijing's rare earth gambit backfires, prompting an emergency downshift and a sudden change in diplomatic tone. The US and Australia are joining forces to build a de-Chinaized rare earth alliance as a global encirclement takes shape. The South China Sea flares again, and the US warns, if you strike again, it's an attack on an ally. On the eve of the fourth plenum, Beijing is teetering at a critical point of twin political-economic meltdowns and internal-external crises. Will this rare earth high-stakes gamble become the last straw that breaks the CCP? Don't miss the next drop, subscribe and enable the bell. Trump opens fire. 100% tariffs counting down, Beijing's rare earth war crashes and burns, then swerves hard. On October 14th, U.S. Trade Representative Greer warned, tariffs can be raised at any time, it depends on whether the CCP escalates. With that one line, Beijing went silent. State media urgently toned things down, the diplomatic line abruptly shifted, and the rare earth war turned into a self-inflicted blast. Trump's counter, joining with Australia to forge a de-Chinaized rare earth alliance. China loses markets, loses face, and gets ringed by allies. Even more lethal, the military front erupted as well. In the South China Sea, China Coast Guard ships used water cannons on a Philippine vessel. The U.S. immediately warned, strike again, and it's an attack on an ally. All this is happening as the CCP counts down to the fourth plenum, facing a dual political-economic collapse. From rare earths to the South China Sea, from markets to infighting, Beijing is spinning out of control. Will this rare earth roll of the dice become the last straw that breaks the Xi regime? Rare earth war ignites. Trump's 100% tariffs on the countdown. On October 14th, U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer announced that tariffs on Chinese goods might be implemented earlier than expected, depending on the CCP's next move. It's their choice whether to escalate. On CNBC, Greer called the CCP's recent rare earth export controls sudden and disproportionate, but said he is confident the rare earth issue can be resolved because Beijing has few exits left. Escalating trade tensions have already had economic consequences. On October 14th, Washington and Beijing began charging additional port fees to shipping companies. Despite tensions, Greer said the planned meeting between U.S. President Trump and CCP leader Xi Jinping would still proceed. He described the past 6 months of talks with China as constructive until the recent rare earth dispute. Trump's new tariff package is expected to take effect on November 1st. According to the Peterson Institute for International Economics, PIIE, as of September 25th, the average U.S. tariff on Chinese imports stood at 58%, while China's average tariff on U.S. goods was 33%. On October 14th, the U.S. began imposing new tariffs on imported lumber, cabinets, and soft furniture, much of which comes from China. In an interview with the Financial Times, Treasury Secretary Bessent warned, if they, the CCP, want to slow the global economy, the ultimate victim will be themselves. Wen T-sung, a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council's Global China Hub, argued that if the CCP backs down, Trump can set the tone for U.S. China relations in the coming months. But since a Beijing concession seems unlikely, whether the planned Trump-Xi summit happens on schedule remains uncertain. Softening in Beijing? A ban becomes a limit. After the CCP kicked off the rare earth fight, Trump promptly announced a 100% tariff on all Chinese imports, and Beijing's posture immediately softened. China controls over 90% of the world's rare earth processing capacity. U.S. defense, semiconductors, tech, and auto manufacturing rely heavily on rare earth materials. The rare earth war reflects the intensity of U.S. China competition. Bloomberg's analysis suggests that China won face but lost substance. It sharply heightened tensions, and, as USTR Greer said, undercut the generally constructive communications of the past 6 months. The rare earth dispute suddenly chilled the atmosphere. The CCP's wolf warrior stance of accompanying to the end sent chills through the countless Chinese manufacturers dependent on the U.S. market. Watching U.S. importers cut orders and rush to find alternative suppliers and supply chains, China's market and consumer confidence took a heavy hit. Sun Yun, director of the China program at the Stimson Center, noted that the CCP seems to have developed a dangerous new habit of consistently underestimating Washington's willingness and capacity to retaliate. As an autocrat, Xi Jinping disregards the damage trade war inflicts on markets and ordinary people. With rare earths, the CCP built control over the global supply chain by sacrificing the environment and people's health, something unimaginable in the U.S. and the West. Thus, while countering CCP provocations, Trump also has to consider market and business tolerance. On October 14, the Wall Street Journal reported that the rare earth clash reignited U.S.-China trade conflict, triggering a broad market sell-off in the U.S. Beijing doesn't want to lose the chance for an eventual Trump-Xi meeting in Korea, while Trump's team wants to contain stock market declines. In recent days, President Trump spoke with Treasury Secretary Bessent and other senior officials about signaling to the world that the U.S. seeks to ease tensions with China so as to calm markets. According to people familiar, U.S. officials have for weeks been exploring tools to counter the CCP if necessary, measures to protect U.S. infrastructure from CCP penetration and further restrict Chinese investment in the U.S., including tougher audit reviews for China-based companies listed in the U.S., potentially targeting those stocks. Ultimately, last week Trump, Bessent, and other senior advisors agreed to prioritize stabilizing global markets while striving to avoid an immediate escalation with Beijing. Someone close to Bessent said that after Trump announced the 100% tariff measure against China, Bessent made clear in recent contacts with CCP officials that Trump is open to talks to cool things down, but countermeasures are not off the table if Beijing won't budge. Another person close to Bessent stressed the possibility of countermeasures against China, adding that the U.S. is fully prepared to act. The CCP also wants to cool things down. Chinese domestic media have carried very little on Trump's recent 100% tariff announcement. Wall Street Journal reported that the CCP is avoiding inflammatory rhetoric to pave itself a way out, so it can walk back its rare earth policy from a full ban to a more limited restriction without losing face. Beijing has signaled a softened stance on its disruptive rare earth export controls but hasn't suggested a complete reversal. Its refusal to lift controls injects uncertainty into upcoming trade talks and could trigger a new round of retaliation and counter-retaliation. U.S. firms operating in China hope both sides avoid a new round of triple-digit tariffs. Sean Stein, president of the U.S. China Business Council, said, "The U.S. and China can choose to ignite a new cycle of actions and reprisals, or choose a path toward de-escalation and negotiations. For the sake of the economy, American companies favor the latter." While the CCP stirred up a rare earth war, the U.S. has been actively building its own supply chain. Australia steps in, building a de-Chinaized minerals alliance. AFP reported on October 14 that Australia is accelerating efforts to reach a critical minerals agreement with the U.S., preparing to open its rich reserves and become a more reliable supplier than China. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese will travel to Washington this month seeking a deal to provide more critical minerals to the U.S. Trade Minister Don Farrell explicitly said he wants a broader cooperation agreement. "We've been discussing critical minerals since the day Trump became U.S. president," he said earlier in October. Australia holds large rare earth resources such as neodymium and praseodymium, coveted metals used for powerful magnets essential across industries. But environmental and health concerns have made it hard to build refining capacity. Over 90% of Australia's lithium ore is shipped to China's large refineries each year. Lynas, an Australian company, is the only significant rare earth producer outside China. To weaken China's control, the U.S. government has signed a $258 million contract with Lynas to build a new rare earth refinery in Texas. As these metals grow more strategic, Australia also worries about foreign attempts to infiltrate its mining firms. A government notice in March said, "Mineral-rich Australian companies are becoming targets of foreign states seeking commercial, technological, or strategic advantage." In 2024, Canberra forced several Chinese shareholders to sell stakes in domestic rare earth company Northern Minerals. The Trump administration is watching Beijing's moves to decide whether to bring forward tariff penalties. U.S. moves in succession, shipping and shipbuilding as new battlefields. The CCP, however, is not letting up and is widening the dispute. On October 14, Beijing launched new countermeasures, extending trade friction from rare earths to maritime shipping and shipbuilding. In April last year, the U.S. invoked Section 301 to investigate China's maritime, logistics, and shipbuilding sectors. This April, it announced that starting October 14, all China-linked vessels calling at U.S. ports must pay tonnage-based fees. On October 14, China's Commerce Ministry announced on its website that to counter the U.S. Section 301 measures it would place 5 U.S. subsidiaries of Hanwha Ocean on a sanctions list. Beijing also announced investigations into actions by the U.S. and certain countries and companies that harm the security and development interests of China's shipping and shipbuilding sectors, with countermeasures to follow as appropriate. On October 14, South Korea's presidential office said it is in talks with China to minimize the impact of Beijing's sanctions on Hanwha Ocean's U.S. subsidiaries. The statement said Hanwha Ocean has limited transactions with Chinese firms, so the impact should be limited, but further analysis is needed to assess the effect on the Make American Shipbuilding Great Again (MASCA) plan. Even as it rekindles the trade war, the CCP is also stepping up military provocations. South China Sea flashpoint heats up, CCG water cannon attack on the Philippines stokes anger again. On October 12, a China Coast Guard vessel used water cannons and rammed a Philippine boat in the Spratly Islands, then played the victim, claiming the Philippine ship ignored warnings and caused the incident. Reuters reported that on October 13, State Department spokesperson Tommy Pigott condemned the provocation, saying the U.S. stands with its allies to jointly oppose the PRC's dangerous actions that destabilize the region. Pigott cited Article 4 of the 1951 Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty, extending coverage to any armed attack on Philippine armed forces, public vessels, or aircraft, including the Coast Guard, anywhere in the South China Sea. Jay Tariella, spokesperson for the Philippine Coast Guard, PCG, posted on social media on October 12 that PCG and fisheries vessels had recently gone to Scarborough Shoal and Sabina Shoal to deliver supplies and buy fish from fishermen to support their livelihoods, but were again harassed en route by China's Coast Guard, Maritime Militia, and Navy. As Treasury Secretary Besant said, China's economy is feeble. The CCP's attempt to drag the world down through a rare earth war will ultimately hurt itself first. On the eve of the fourth plenum, CCP political economic storm fully breaks. With the fourth plenum imminent, the CCP is in a state of shrill winds and rustling grass, spooked by every shadow. October 13 marked the third anniversary of the brave Peng Zizhou's public protest on Beijing's Sidong Bridge. On the eve of the 20th Party Congress, Peng unfurled giant banners reading, "We want food, not COVID tests, reform, not cultural revolution, freedom, not lockdowns, votes, not leaders, dignity, not lies, citizens, not slaves." It shocked the world and awakened the Chinese people. Now, the Yuminglong incident is still fermenting and may become yet another force pushing over the CCP's totalitarian rule.